All right, so up till now in the class, we've been talking about all the different things that relate to inheriting genes. So we talked about single traits and double traits, and how you have traits on chromosomes and how we inherit chromosomes. So now we're going to start to talk about some of the things that can arise because of these. So this chapter is going to be about cancer. So cancer is a group of diseases, and it has two properties that is always associated with it. One is uncontrolled cell growth. So this means that the cell gets signals to keep undergoing mitosis. There are two words that we often interchange a lot in our society, and that's the terms cancer and tumor. Typically, if you have just uncontrolled cell growth, this is what is referred to as a benign tumor. So you can have a tumor and not necessarily have cancer. In fact, I had a friend, actually, she was one of a twin who were identical, and for some reason, over the course of her life, she actually developed a tumor in her back. Now, tumors can still be problematic and sometimes deadly depending on where they are, but they don't necessarily have to be a cancer. In her case, the uncontrolled cell growth began to infringe on her spinal cord and began to affect the nerves of her spinal cord. They were able to go in, remove it, and she was fine from there on out. In order to be a cancer, though, not only do you need uncontrolled cell growth, you need it to metastasize. That means it's going to be able to spread from wherever it originated. And so when you hear about people saying they have a cancer, that means not only do they have an uncontrolled growth in one part of their body, they now have it in several parts. And sometimes you might hear this also referred to then as a malignant tumor. So basically, malignant tumor, cancer, these are synonymous terms. All right, so well do we know that genes are related, or genetics is related to cancer? So you can see on the next page, they give us 4 pieces of evidence that have allowed us to draw a link between genetics and cancer. And this isn't something that was just done recently. We've known that the relationship between genes and cancer goes back a long time. We also know it has a lot of environmental factors. For instance, the very first evidence of cancers were actually with chimney sweeps, and they would have scrotal cancers. That one was more environmental because of all the soot that would develop and get caught in between their scrotum and their thighs, and then as that carbon would be pressed against those epithelial cells, it would cause problems, and eventually you would get cancers and tumors that would kill chimney sweeps. All right, so what is the evidence that shows the link between these two things? So these are 4 bullet points. So one is we have known genetic inheritance of some cancers. So we know there are specific genes that are linked to cancers. Just so you know, this is by far the smallest group. Only about 1 to 5% of all the cancers that are out there are known to be from heritable cases. Most of them are associated with mutations that come on by environmental causes. We also know that there are chemicals out there, and we call those chemicals mutagens. We know that there's a link between chemicals that cause cancer and mutagens that cause mutations that lead to cancers. We also know about viruses now. We know that viruses, they have to insert their genome. So if this is a growth gene in your cell, and this is used to control cell growth, if all of a sudden you have a virus that inserts its genome into that gene, it can break it up. And now here we have a viral genome that is now interrupting the cell this growth gene that controls cell growth, now this would lead to uncontrolled growth. These types of viruses that happen to interrupt us and interrupt genes that control cell growth, these are called oncoviruses. And we're learning more and more about these, and we think now maybe 15 to 20% of all the cancers that arise are due to these viruses, these oncoviruses. And then a fourth relationship, we just got done talking about chromosomal abnormalities. So when you have genes that are moving around, either duplicating, inverting, deleting, or swapping those transposons, anytime they do, they also, like a virus, have the chance of interrupting genes that control cell growth and can lead to cancers. All right. So the next step is, we know that there's this link between genetics and cancer. So what are some of those mutations we've talked about? So this is sort of a summarization of some things that we've been doing already. We've been talking a lot about different types of mutations. So this is a chance to sort of bring all those together. Mutations that can cause cancers. So we just got done talking about substitution and frame shift mutations. Either a deletion or an insertion. Substitutions in genes that control cell growth, or frame shift mutations in genes that control cell growth, can lead to cancers. We also talked about, and I just mentioned, you have chromosomal changes. So those chromosomal abnormalities, those duplications, the inversions, the deletions, the reciprocal translocations, the Robertsonian translocations, all of those are chromosomal abnormalities that can lead to cancers. Or you can have variations in the number of gene copies. This is typically, you have duplications of genes that control cell growth. If you have a lot of genes that control cell growth, especially those that promote cell growth, then the more you have, the more cell growth you can have. And so what happens here is sort of a duplication on a smaller scale. Instead of a whole region of a chromosome being duplicated, single genes can be duplicated. And sometimes you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if it just for some reason keeps duplicating and inserting itself into the genome.